Imagine witnessing such a supernatural event that it challenges all human logic. Elijah, one of the greatest prophets in history, lived just as he disappeared before the eyes of his disciple, brought by a direct fire carriage to the heavens. But what led to this impressive moment? How could a man simply disappear before all? Today, let's dive into this incredible journey of faith, miracles, and confrontations, revealing the secrets behind Elijah's rise and the impact of the story to this day. Elijah arises mysteriously, without any known family antecedent. Suddenly, it appears before King Ahab, one of the most wicked rulers of Israel. Without fear, he proclaims a shocking message: there will be no dew or rain in the coming years except for my word. This announcement was not just a weather forecast. It was a divine judgment against the idolatry of the people who had exchanged the true God for Baal. King Ahab and his wife Jezebel had turned Israel into a kingdom dominated by idolatry. Prophets of the Lord were persecuted, and worship of Baal spread quickly. Elijah, as a true messenger of God, confronts this corruption directly. His announcement of the drought was a deadly blow against Baal, which allegedly controlled the fertility of the earth and the rains. Now Israel would face years of desolation, and the uselessness of their false gods would be exposed. With the drought, by plaguing the nation, Elijah becomes a public enemy number one. Jezebel wishes his head, and the blame ended for calamity. But this was just the first phase of an impressive story. What would God do to sustain his prophet during this dark period? The next step on Elias' journey leads us to an unexpected hiding place, where an amazing miracle happens. After the announcement of the drought, God commands Elias to hide in the Ribeiro de Doritis. Amid the relentless drought, where any drop of water was worth gold, this stream would be its refuge. But how would he survive without food? The answer came unexpectedly. Ravens, birds known for not sharing food, were in charge of God to bring bread and flesh to the prophet daily. A supernatural sustenance in times of scarcity. The scene is extraordinary. While every Israel suffered from hunger and thirst, Elijah was sustained by means that challenged human logic. Each morning and afternoon, the crows were faithfully appeared, proving that when God gives an order, even creation obeys. This miracle not only preserved Elijah physically, but also strengthened his faith. He would learn that his survival did not depend on circumstances, but on the God who provides. However, a new challenge is approaching. The Ribeiro, which once gave it water, begins to dry. The drought was fulfilling its course, and even Elias' hiding place felt the impact. But that was not the end. God had already prepared the next step. And this time, the provision would come from an even more unlikely place, the house of a widow on the brink of death. What would happen next? With the dry, dating Riberate, God instructs Elijah to go to Sarepta, a foreign city. There he finds a widow who collected firewood to prepare his last meal. Hunger plagued the region, and she only had a handful of flour and a little olive oil. Elijah, however, makes a surprising request that she first prepare bread. The widow hesitates, but hearing the prophet's promise that flour and olive oil would not end, decide to trust. And impossible happens. Day after day, the widow's flour and olive oil multiply miraculously. She, her son, and Elijah have enough food to survive the crisis. This miracle not only proves God's care with his own, but also reveals something greater. God chooses to act through the unlikely. Who would imagine that an Israeli prophet would be supported by a Gentile widow? But the widow's proof of faith had not yet ended. Her son gets sick and dies, plunging her into despair. Elijah, taken with compassion, sometimes fervently to God, and something unprecedented happens. A child comes back to life. This was one of the first accounts of resurrection in the Bible, showing that God not only sustains, but has power over his own death. What else would he do through Elijah? After years of drought, Elias reappears and launches a direct challenge to Baal's prophets. At the top of Mount Carmel, he proposes a test. Both would offer a sacrifice, but without lighting the fire. The true God would respond with fire from heaven. In the face of an anxious crowd, Baal's 450 prophets, they dance and even hurt themselves, but nothing happens. Elijah, with a touch of irony, suggests that Baal may be sleeping or busy. The silence of the false god is deafening. Then Elijah approaches the altar of the Lord, restoring him with 12 stones, representing the tribes of Israel. To make the challenge even more impossible, It has the wood bending with water 3 times. When he prays, a divine fire falls from heaven, consuming not only the sacrifice, but also the wood, the stones, and even the surrounding water. The impacted people prostrate into reverence and declare, "The Lord is God." It was a decisive moment for Israel, but spiritual victory needed to be complete. Elijah orders the execution of the prophets of Baal, eliminating the influence of idolatry. The tension between Elias and Jezebel grows even more, preparing the terrain for the next events. The prophet had proved that God was the only true, but had the heart of the people really changed? After the impressive demonstration of power on Mount Carmel, Elias turns his attention to the drought that plagued Israel. He rises to the summit of the hill and prostrates himself in intense prayer, asking God to bring the rain back. His servant looks at the sky repeatedly and, after 7 attempts, sees a small cloud the size of a man's hand. It was the sign. In a short time, the skies are filled with dark clouds, and heavy rain falls on the earth, ending the drought years. Meanwhile, Ahab returns to Jezreel in his carriage, but something surprising happens. Taken by the power of the Spirit of the Lord, Elijah runs in front of the king's carriage, traveling miles at supernatural speed. However, victory soon gives way to fear. Jezebel, furious with the death of the prophets of Baal, swears to kill Elijah. The prophet, who had faced hundreds of men alone, now escapes to save his life. In the desert, exhausted and discouraged, Elijah sits under a juniper and cries to God, asking to die. The same man who had challenged kings and prophets is now taken over by despair. But God does not abandon him. An angel appears and gives him bread and water, strengthening him to the journey that would come. Elijah needed to go to Mount Horeb, where he would have a transforming meeting with the Lord. Elijah walks for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Mount Horeb, the same place where God had spoken to Moses. Exhausted and downcast, he takes refuge in a cave, feeling alone and failed. So God asks him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The prophet vent, saying that he was zealous by the Lord, but now his life is threatened and he feels the only rest. God then commands Elijah to leave the cave, for he would pass by. First comes a strong wind, capable of shattering the rocks, but God was not in the wind. Then an earthquake shakes the mountain, but God was not in the earthquake either. Then comes an intense fire, but again God was not there. Finally, a soft whisper fills the environment. Elijah covers his face and bends, for he realizes that there was the presence of God. At this moment, God renews Elijah's mission and gives him 3 tasks, anointing Hazael as king of Syria, Jehu as king of Israel, and Elisha as his successor. Moreover, the Lord reveals that 7,000 Israelites still remain faithful, denying Elijah's idea that he was alone. With new strength and a restored purpose, Elias prepares for the next stage of his journey. After his encounter with God on Mount Horeb, Elias goes to fulfill his mission. In the field, he finds Elisha by drawing the earth with 12 joints of oxen. Without saying a word, Elijah throws his cloak upon him. That symbolic gesture was a direct call for Elisha to take over the role of prophet. Elisha immediately understands the meaning and asks permission to say goodbye to his family before following him. Elisha then sacrifices his oxen and burns the plow, showing that he was leaving his old life behind without the possibility of return. This act symbolizes total commitment to God's call. Unlike Elijah, who suddenly emerged, Elisha would begin as an apprentice, accompanying his master and learning from him before assuming his position. This moment marks the transition to prophetic ministry in Israel. Elisha not only follows Elijah, but becomes a servant and disciple, showing humility and willingness to learn. He was about to witness the last and most striking events in Elijah's life, including a spectacular ascension to heaven. Kings greet Ahab by a simple came led to one of the darkest episodes in his history. Naboth, owner of the property, refused to sell it, as he was part of the inheritance of his ancestors. Jezebel, his wife, plotted a cruel plan. He falsely accused Naboth of blasphemy and condemned him to death. So Ahab took possession of the vineyard without any remorse. But this injustice would not go unnoticed in the eyes of God. Elijah appears once again, now to confront and with severe prophecy. He declares that dogs would lick the king's blood in the same place where Naboth died, and that Jezebel would also have a tragic destination. The boldness of the prophet leaves no room for doubt God was about to act. It is terrified, humiliated itself before prophecy and repents, temporarily postponing divine judgment. But Jezebel remains relentless. The years pass, and Elijah's words are impressively. Ahab dies in battle, and when they wash their war car, dogs lick their blood. Jezebel, in turn, is thrown from a window and his body is devoured by dogs, leaving only his skull, feet, and hands. God's righteousness was manifest, and the couple's evil influence over Israel came to an end. Elijah knew that his time on earth was coming to an end. Along with Elisha, his faithful disciple, he traveled different cities, such as Bethel and Jericho, where local prophets already present that something extraordinary was about to happen. Elisha, determined not to move away from his master, refused to leave him alone. The tension in the air increased every step until both arrived in the Jordan River. With a powerful gesture, Elijah hid his cloak in the waters, allowing them to dry them dry. On the other side of Jordan, Elijah turns to Elisha and asks him a surprising question: "What do you want to ask you before I am taken from you?" Elisha, without hesitation, asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. The prophet replies that his request will be granted if he sees him being taken. Suddenly, a fire carriage with flaming horses arises, separating the two. Elijah is raptured in a whirlwind of the heavens before the astonished eyes of Elisha, who shouts, my father, Israel's car and his knights." Elijah's cloak falls to the ground, and Elisha collects him, symbolizing the transfer of the prophetic anointing. Upon return to Jordan, he repeats his master's gesture, and the waters open again. The other prophets, when they see the miracle, recognize that Elijah's spirit now rests on Elisha. Thus, the prophet who challenged kings, faced false gods, and witnessed God's direct action in his life departed in a unique way in history without seeing death, brought into heaven in glory. Elijah's story is not just an old account, it carries deep lessons to our life today. Elijah was an ordinary man, but his faith made him extraordinary. He faced powerful kings, challenged popular beliefs, and remained firm even when everything seemed lost. His journey teaches us that God honors those who trust in him, even in the midst of adversities. Have you ever wondered how your faith can impact the world around you? Like Elijah, we face daily challenges that test our belief and determination. There are times when we feel that we are alone, like the prophet in the desert, but God never leaves us. Your presence may not come in storms or grand miracles, but in the soft voice that strengthens us. Elijah shows us that even when we feel weak, God renews us and gives us a greater purpose. Are you listening to this voice in your life? Finally, Elias reminds us that our walk does not end here. His ascension to heaven points to a greater truth. There is something beyond this world. His legacy continued through Elisha and, to this day, inspires those who seek to live with faith and courage. Your life is a testimony that God always fulfills your promises. And you? Are you prepared to live according to the call God has for your life? The story of Elijah is not just a report of the past. It is a call to all of us. He faced kings, challenged crowds, and remained firm in faith, even when everything seemed lost. His ascension to heaven in a carriage of fire is a powerful reminder that God honors those who live for him. And if Elijah, a man subject to the same emotions as us, could be so bold, which prevents us from living an unshakable faith, what can you learn from Elijah and apply in your life today? Is God calling you to trust him more, even in difficult times? Perhaps it is time to leave behind what weakens your faith and surrender completely to your purpose for you. If Elijah had the courage to challenge false prophets and remain firm, then you can also find strength in God to face any battle. If this message has touched your heart, keep just for you. Subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to know this story. Together we can spread the word and strengthen the faith of many. Remember, just like Elijah, you can also live a life of impact, guided by the voice of God.